You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that had, has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast. I have Rachel Hill. She's the author of Be Your Own Thyroid Advocate, co-authoring as well, providing the foreword for the 30-Minute Thyroid Cookbook. She's an award-winning thyroid patient advocate, writer, and author. She received 6 WAGO Health Award nominations in 2018. Is ranked highly on a lot of hypothyroidism websites as well. So, Rachel, thanks for coming. How you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so tell me about your battles, I guess, with your own thyroid. You wouldn't probably be in this area if you didn't have your own issues. So, if you don't mind, what's happened with your thyroid?
Yes, so essentially, I was eventually diagnosed with hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's, which is the autoimmune disease, after several years of having symptoms of thyroid disease, and they just kind of mounted up with no real explanation over about 5 years or so. So I was eventually diagnosed at 20 years old, by which point I was quite relieved, but also a bit worried, confused, frustrated, and overwhelmed. So I set up the Invisible Hypothyroidism and started blogging as a way of dealing with that and recording my experiences as a thyroid patient looking to reclaim my health, with the mission of letting others know that they weren't alone in experiencing what we experience with thyroid disease too. So through that, I've been able to build quite a strong thyroid community of people to empower, support, and encourage one another to live a good quality of life despite having a thyroid condition. And my main message is to be your own thyroid advocate, which is the tagline for my website and my book, which really means to learn to advocate for your health and to understand what the health condition means and what it means to become an active participant in your own healthcare. So through being diagnosed with a thyroid condition myself and getting quite unwell with it, I've attempted to turn that into something quite positive and therapeutic, I guess, through using the medium of writing and advocating for other thyroid patients.
So if you don't have a thyroid, are you allowed to join your groups and talk to everyone, or is there a low thyroid versus no thyroid battle going on?
Well, if you don't have a thyroid gland, whether that's because you've been born without one, or if you've had it surgically removed because you have thyroid cancer, or even hyperthyroidism, which is an overactive thyroid gland, then generally it means that you get diagnosed with hypothyroidism anyway. So there are various ways that you can get diagnosed with hypothyroidism and sort of lead on to that diagnosis. So in terms of what I do under the Invisible Hypothyroidism, it aims to cover anyone who gets to that point of being diagnosed with it. Like I say, whether that's through autoimmune disease, therapy, cancer, ablation, or any of those other routes towards it, really.
Yeah, I had thyroid cancer, and so no more thyroid for me, unfortunately. I'm hoping to get a 3D printed one back maybe in 10 or 20 years, but in the meantime, I'm on thyroid replacement hormone, as I'm sure a lot of people are. So
yes, yeah.
So what were the symptoms for you, and what are, I'm sure you speak to a lot of people that have it. What are I know every person is different, but what are the symptoms that someone may have that causes them to, when they have hypothyroidism, what do they experience in general?
Yeah, so when you have low thyroid hormone levels, the results can be quite far-reaching. I like to say that it can affect everything from the top of your head to the tip of your toes. Thyroid hormone is required for every cell and every function within the body. So when you don't have enough, it can affect all sorts, and that can include skin complaints such as dry skin, tight skin, eczema, acne. You can have hair loss, bags under the eyes. The most complained about symptoms tend to be a really heavy fatigue that just doesn't seem to be improved with sleep or rest. Muscle aches and pains, joint pain, sort of poor nail growth, brittle hair. It can affect everything. A lot of people even have digestive issues, including things like constipation or diarrhea. Having a swollen tongue can even be a symptom. So all sorts can be affected when you have low thyroid hormone levels in the form of hypothyroidism. And for me, the main symptoms were that heavy fatigue that just seemed to get worse as time went on. I had muscle pain, joint pain. My legs would cramp at night, which would wake me up, and it was really painful. I started getting migraines as a late teenager, and they just increased in frequency, along with my periods becoming more irregular and going from heavy to light and just kind of going all over the place. So really, if there's anything off in your body, in particular a slowing down of functions, such as feeling tired or experiencing constipation or hair loss, things like that, and then they can be signs of hypothyroidism, and it's always worth getting yourself checked out. I mean, thyroid conditions are quite common, and we think a lot of people are going misdiagnosed as well. So it's always worth getting checked out if you experience any of those symptoms.
Yeah, and it seems like I've noticed. I mean, I'm just one person, but it seems like for some reason women are affected much more than men, and even the doctors and the surgeons and the healthcare practitioners in the field all seem to be women. It's just very strange.
I think it's something like for every man, there's like 9 or 10 women that are diagnosed with a thyroid condition. And I think that probably just bottles down to the fact that it's a hormonal condition, it's a hormonal imbalance. And as women, when we experience things puberty with the onset of periods, or pregnancy, birth, even pregnancy loss, the menopause, perimenopause, with those hormonal fluctuations, it can, I think it makes sense that it can then lead on to other hormonal imbalances, as they're all so delicately intertwined and kind of work together in one system.
So I've also spoken to a bunch of women that, they seem to be experiencing low thyroid or Hashimoto's, but the doctors are not too helpful. They'll get a reading of their TSH or other, thyroid hormones, and it may be quote unquote in range, but low or high. And the person's experiencing all kinds of stuff. And the doctor says, oh, you're in range, you're fine, or there's nothing wrong with you, you're crazy. So hopefully you haven't experienced that, but I don't know if that's common over in the UK. It seems to be in the US very common. But what do women do if what people do if that they experience that from doctors?
I was one of those people, unfortunately. It is really common. A lot of people take a while to get that eventual diagnosis and get started on medication or treatment. And a lot of that is due to these sort of wide reference ranges that are used, and they differ from lab to lab, but also country to country. I know in the US, typically a range of sort of 0.5 to say 5-ish tends to be used over there. And if you fall just outside or just inside of those, you can be diagnosed with borderline hypothyroidism, and it's at the discretion of the doctor that you see whether you're then trialed on thyroid hormone replacement to see if that helps. Over here in the UK, that range can go up to as high as 10, and that is unfortunately what my doctor was using. So when my TSH was up to like 9.6 or something like that, I was still technically within range, and so I was diagnosed with borderline hypothyroidism, but my symptoms did not feel borderline at all. I was incredibly unwell. I was missing a lot of work. I was attending sort of one day a week for quite a while. My mental health was devastated. My now husband, at the time was my boyfriend, he was having to help me up and down the stairs, help me get dressed and showered and go to the toilet and things like that. It can be quite the journey getting that eventual diagnosis and treatment. And thankfully, when a lot of people get to that point, they do tend to start to see improvement with time. But there is a lack of consistency in terms of how people get diagnosed. And like I say, it doesn't just differ from country to country, but it can differ from lab to lab. So depending on what lab your doctor or that particular surgery or office uses as well. So it can be quite frustrating.
Well, what do you do if medical practitioners, don't seem to care and just tell people they're crazy? What kind of things, I know you're not a doctor yourself, but what can you recommend? What do people do if they're experiencing this frustration? They know something's wrong, but doctors are telling them they're crazy or they're fine.
Well, I think this is where it's important to embrace being your own health advocate, which is, what I encourage everyone to do. If you can obtain printed copies of your test results, or whether they're available online to you, I know that can differ from doctor's surgery to surgery as well. Sort of getting copies of those, understanding what they mean. A lot of the time, different doctors use these wide ranges, but what we tend to feel best at can be quite different. So within sort of progressive and functional medicine, we refer to these as optimal ranges or optimal results. So whether a range for example, your TSH could be 0.5 to 10, an optimal place within range might be 0.5 to 2. So it's a much slimmer place to fall. But what that means is that a lot of people feel a lot better within that narrower range. That's where they feel most well. And so understanding things like that, looking at your test results and understanding whether actually you may fall in range, and that might be why a doctor is dismissing you and your concerns. But actually, if you're able to get yourself within optimal place within range, you could feel a lot better. And through just simply knowing that knowledge, it means you can take that to another doctor or another medical professional. And you don't have to just stick with the same type of medical professional either. Obviously, conventional medicine is great and it works for so many things and so many conditions and diseases. But talking to a lot of thyroid patients, and in my own experience as well, a lot of us seem to find, improved success with functional medicine practitioners or doctors, naturopathic doctors, more sort of alternative medicine as well, that can work in partnership with you in your health to really narrow these ranges and to look at you as an individual and form a more individualized treatment plan instead of subjecting everyone to the same ranges and the same treatment. I think that's what's important. I think we need to be looking at thyroid patients as the individuals that they are, and by learning to advocate for your own health, by learning to understand what your test results mean and what is okay and what's not, and where you can actually better your health. Through just understanding that information, people are often able to then use that to find or try different types of medical practitioners until they find the one that works for them to get their health back on track. And I think that's really important, to empower yourself with the knowledge to then go into the correct practitioner's office in order to get your health back on track.
What about the tests themselves? I mean, you could have just TSH, or you could have TSH, free T4, T3, reverse T3, T2, thyroid antibodies 1 and 2. I mean, what do you recommend that someone gets if they suspect they may have Hashimoto's or they may have low thyroid symptoms? Every test you can, or which ones?
I think it goes without saying that the more comprehensive testing you can do, the better handle you're going to have on your thyroid health, and your doctor or chosen practitioner that you choose to go through that with. TSH, which is most often tested and often considered to be the gold standard of thyroid testing, that gives us an insight or an idea of what's going on with our thyroid health. But as it's a pituitary hormone and not a thyroid hormone, it is just that. It gives an indication. A full thyroid panel consists of the other tests that you mentioned just then, so your free T3, free T4, reverse T3, thyroid peroxidase antibodies and thyroglobulin antibodies. All of those tests form the full thyroid panel, and if we can monitor as many of those as possible, then that gives us the best chance of getting back on top of our health and understanding things going forward. In terms of hypothyroidism, TSH, free T3, free T4, and reverse T3 tend to be used. And if you're looking at diagnosing Hashimoto's or even monitoring how Hashimoto's is doing, then that's when you'd need those two antibodies, thyroid peroxidase and thyroglobulin. So typically results over range on those two tests would diagnose Hashimoto's, although apparently some people still don't come up positive on those, even though they could have it. So it's important to try and monitor all of those tests every time. And if you can keep records of those tests as well, it makes it easy to go back and compare them and link how you're feeling, such as symptoms or improvements or dips in your health, with those tests, so that you can figure out with your doctor or your practitioner where your optimal places are in range as well.
So are most doctors willing to run that suite of tests, or do you have to find the right one that's willing to do that? Do they block you even at that stage?
It differs hugely from sort of doctor to doctor, but I think also by country quite a lot as well. So here in the UK, TSH is the standard, and it's incredibly hard, and it's getting more difficult to get a doctor on the NHS anyway to test anything else. I'm lucky enough that I get my free T3 and free T4 tested with my TSH every 6 months as standard anyway. But that has been through, educating myself and learning to advocate and go into the doctor's office clued up, and essentially to put my foot down and say what I want and give a reason why, and have the doctor, actually agree with me and back me on that. In terms of the US, again, TSH is seen as that gold standard. It seems, talking to other thyroid patients, that your free T3 and T4 and the antibodies are tested a bit more regularly. But again, similar to over here in the UK, it doesn't seem to be the norm. And so whether that means trying a different doctor or a different type of practitioner to get those tested, or whether it means ordering your own labs, which a lot of people are doing now. There's a lot of services online where you can order your own test results, and they're completely real, they're completely legitimate. You can get your blood taken, whether it's through a finger prick at home or you attend one of these centres, and you can then receive your results online within a couple of days of sending it back, and that's very easy. That's another option if your doctor doesn't run those additional tests for whatever reason. And you can take those into your doctor as well, and they'll be fully recognised, and they can be added to your medical record, medical history as well. So if you're finding that your doctor isn't running those tests by default, and then there are other options, such as again, looking at finding a different type of practitioner that might work better for you in your case, or utilising those online services that offer them as well.
What about the medication itself? Synthroid is the king. It's T4 only. Even there, a lot of doctors, Synthroid's the only fine one. Armor is no good. Natural thyroid's no good. WP's no good. Because they're mixes. You don't need it. So for listeners, Synthroid's just T4. There are other medications that are mixtures of T4 and T3, even T2. Any experience with those? And what are your thoughts on them?
Yeah, so I started after being diagnosed with borderline hypothyroidism. I was withheld medication for a while longer, and then eventually started on T4 only levothyroxine, which again is the only thing that's really prescribed over here, certainly 99% of the time anyway. I was on that for 6 months, and my health was rapidly declining. It was quite scary. I was a 21-year-old that was practically disabled, and it was very frustrating because the doctors didn't seem to believe me when I said that I didn't feel that this medication was really helping. Eventually, I started on an NDT medication, so that's natural desiccated thyroid, and that is essentially made from porcine, so pig thyroid gland, and this is the sort of natural thyroid extracts that we talk about. This contains natural forms of thyroid hormones instead of the synthetic ones in T4. So this includes T1, T2, 3, 4, and often calcitonin as well, which is essentially what your own thyroid gland would be making if it was healthy. And some people feel better or do better on this when T4 only medication doesn't work for them, because it provides that full spectrum of thyroid hormones. In theory, T4 should work. You put it in, and the body converts some of it to that T3, the active form of thyroid hormone that we also need. And for a lot of people, this does work absolutely fine. There's no doubt about that. But for some people, they do need that direct T3 too. And whether that is by taking an NDT medication like what I take that gives you that direct T3, or whether, again, there is another type of thyroid medication, which is synthetic T3, you can add that to your synthetic T4 as well, and get the direct T3 that way too. So there are various sort of combinations and ways that that we can be prescribed medication, and that we can, get better with thyroid disease. But I think it really, again, it has to be individualized. As with anything, no one is completely the same. We don't all respond to stuff completely the same. And I'm one of the many people that unfortunately didn't do well on T4 medication. I don't know about yourself, but there are a lot of us out there that don't do well on that medication, and we need those other options available to us.
Yeah, for me, the T4 works fine, but I'd rather be as optimal as possible. And I've been searching for other medications and other practitioners, and I found a few that have recommended different ones. But one told me that compounded versions, you have to be careful because they may not be compounded properly. Another said, well, if you go on this one, it may not be standardized, which doesn't seem to be true. It seems like they have to be standardized, otherwise how could they offer the medication? Then I've read that your T4 to T3 conversion fraction, which happens in your stomach, it seems, that's modulated by your microbiome and what you eat. So I'm actually at the point where I'm ready to go from T4 to, a mixture, but I worry about the transition because, there's part of the if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. So any experience there with people that have gone from T4 to the mixture and what happened to them and what to look for?
I think for me, when I was on T4 only medication, being levothyroxine, I just knew that it wasn't working. I think if that worked absolutely fine for me, then I would have just stuck with it. Like you say, if something's not broken, don't try to fix it. I think some people make a change to adding synthetic T3 to their T4, or they take an NDT or compounded NDT, and they feel worse on it. I think we're all made up differently. Our bodies work differently, and so it really depends on you as the individual. Speaking to the thyroid patients that I do in my community, there are people that have been on T4 and they feel absolutely fine, and they've never wanted to try anything else because they just don't need to. There are people who feel well on that for so long, and then they start to feel unwell, add some T3 in, and they feel great again. There are others who feel okay on T4, add that T3 in out of curiosity, I guess almost like yourself, and then they feel worse for it, and they go back to T4 and they feel better again. It's really individualized, like I say, and I guess it's one of those things that you're probably not going to know unless you try it as well. But for me, I'm currently on one brand of NDT medication, and I'm looking at possibly changing to another for various reasons. And similar to you, I'm just a bit apprehensive because I feel quite well on the one that I'm on, but I do wonder if things could be even better. Is it worth trying something else and seeing if that happens? But then I also don't want to, take steps back in my health. So I think as thyroid patients, we have a lot to consider, and there's so much information out there that it can be quite overwhelming at times as well.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't poke the thyroid bear, leave it alone. I don't know. But
possibly.
When you say you feel great versus not feeling great, or when people tell you that, what does that mean? What are some examples? So let's say someone is transitioning, or they're choosing, or they're new to this. What is, feeling good is feeling good. Nothing seems to be wrong with you. What does feeling bad mean in the thyroid world?
Really just an increase in symptoms, or symptoms that aren't going away, they're getting worse. So things like that, fatigue, brain fog. I should have mentioned that earlier. Actually, that's a really big symptom that can be really sort of affecting our life in terms of your work life and personal life. I think generally if you just feel quite unwell, a lot of people compare hypothyroidism to like having the flu. They're very similar symptoms. And I know that if I have a flare-up day where I might have done too much the day before and really overexerted myself, or I've been under a lot of stress recently, or if I just catch a virus or a cold like anyone else, my body seems to take it that little bit harder. And so that can put me through a day or two where I suddenly feel really hypothyroid whilst my body is coping with that additional stress that other people's bodies and their thyroids would be able to cope with much easier. It's just that a bit harder on me. And in those times, I see, increased fatigue, brain fog, muscle aches and pains, or a heaviness to my body. I just feel weighed down in a sense and slowed down as if I'm going in slow motion. And yeah, talking to other thyroid patients, that seems to be the common thing, as if you've got the flu. Feeling worse in a flare-up of symptoms, whether your medication doesn't seem to be working, or you might need a dosage increase or a change to another medication. It tends to be represented in more symptoms, worse symptoms, or sort of feeling as if you're going backwards in your health, so feeling okay for a bit and then suddenly feeling worse. Yeah, anything like that I think constitutes as feeling bad, or needing to go back to your doctor and having a chat about your current treatment plan. It's a condition that can be well managed if you get that treatment right and manage to tweak it to what you need. But unfortunately, a lot of people out there are unnecessarily suffering and feeling really unwell with this condition, because I guess a lot of people just don't really understand the condition or what it means or what's going on inside their bodies. So yeah, if we can empower ourselves and make ourselves more aware, then that means that we can be an active participant in our own healthcare and understand what it means to have good and bad health days and how to limit those bad days down so that most of the time we feel good.
But what are some natural things you can do? I mean, like one thing is, should you keep a food log? And have you known anyone to do that? Does that correlate with how they feel when they've had a history of thyroid issues? Are there other things that people can do, exercise or modulate sleep, or what are some of the non-medication or medication-assisted ways you can help yourself?
Yeah, I think I often talk about getting your health back on track with hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's as piecing together a big thyroid jigsaw puzzle. So it often requires quite a holistic approach. I mean, again, you have to add that disclaimer that some people take T4 thyroid medication and feel absolutely fine, and they don't seem to need to do anything else. And their life isn't much affected, and they go on through life feeling quite well. But for some of us, we can get to a certain point with medication correcting things, and then there's some other things, some other interventions or changes that we can make that get us that a little bit closer back to full health or living a really good quality of life, and instead of just living an okay quality of life. So things like looking at your diet can help. I know for me personally, I've been gluten-free now for a few years, and that made a big difference to brain fog, energy levels. My cystic acne cleared up. My periods regulated again. It's crazy how certain foods or inflammation in the body, which is what gluten was causing for me, or poor gut health. You touched on the microbiome earlier. It's crazy how much those things are all interlinked and how they can affect one another. So yeah, I mean, dialing in on what you're eating and paying attention to whether certain things could be making your symptoms worse, as opposed to, there's certain foods or things that make you feel better. I know for me, in terms of exercise, doing things like cardio, trying to run, work out, doing dance classes, that was making my health worse. I could feel straight after a session, if I even made it through a session, that I just felt worse for it. But instead of supplementing that for going for walks, starting at going for a walk for 10 minutes a day and slowly building that up to half an hour, 45 minutes, and now I can go out and walk for a good hour or two. That alone has improved my health a lot. It makes me feel fitter and just generally more healthy, and like I'm living a more fulfilling life. So by just making that simple adjustment to, adjusting my exercise so that it was working for my body and with my health instead of making it worse, that was a really big step. People looking at whether the most offending foods such as gluten, dairy, soy, other grains, whether those things are making their health worse, and whether trialing removing those things from their diet help. That can be a really big step, as well as sort of simple things that can be corrected quite easily, such as low vitamin levels. So it's important to check that your iron, ferritin, B12, vitamin D, all of those things are really good, if not optimized, as well, because a part of my problem at the beginning of my diagnosis, yes, I had a thyroid condition, but I was also anemic in terms of iron, and I had borderline deficient vitamin D. So that was certainly not going to be helping things like poor stamina and joint pain and fatigue and that sort of thing. So it's important to look at things holistically, and try and figure out which of these kind of jigsaw pieces apply to us and which ones we can slot back into place to form this bigger picture of what we need to do to get ourselves back to better health and then also maintain it as well. But yeah, you've got to be willing to put that commitment in to doing a bit of digging and researching. And like you say, it could be something as simple as just honing in on your sleep routine and being a bit more strict about when you're getting yourself off to bed and what you can do to make yourself sleep better. Even diet, exercise, supplements and vitamin levels. There's a lot that we can do. And if we can sort of embrace advocating for ourselves and digging into that information and finding out what does and doesn't apply to us, then that can go a long way, as well as taking thyroid medication. I think it's important not to rely entirely on thyroid medication, because for a lot of us, that does only get us so far.
Well, very good. So what are some resources for listeners? I mentioned your book. Sounds like you're very active online. So how can people get in touch or ask questions or join one of the communities you're involved in or read your book? What are some resources for them?
So like I said earlier, my website is theinvisiblehypothyroidism.com. On there, I add new blogs weekly, and that's sort of on my personal experiences, as well as things like book reviews on sort of thyroid health books and books that can be really helpful in getting your health sorted with thyroid disease. I also write informative articles based on studies and science and research and that sort of thing as well. There's my book, Be Your Own Thyroid Advocate, When You're Sick and Tired of Being Sick and Tired. That came out about 6 months ago now, and that compounds a lot of that information in an easy to digest and understand format, because I appreciate that a lot of thyroid patients have fatigue and brain fog. So a lot of what I do aims to not overwhelm people, but to give them the information that they need to build them a solid basis to then go forward in their own health. You can find me on social media as well. So I'm around on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest. I'm active across various places, and I also run a Facebook support group as well. We've got almost 50,000 members on there now. So that's for thyroid patients. It's a lot of people. We obviously can't provide medical advice, but it's a great place for people to come and vent if you need to, if you're having a bad day with it all, as well as share resources like books that you found helpful or websites, and to talk about the sort of things that have helped one another. It's been important for me in my thyroid journey to build a community of thyroid patients that can help each other out and provide a sense of support and help other people realize that they're not alone with thyroid disease. I think that's really important, because it can be an isolating condition to live with.
Definitely. Great. Well, Rachel, thanks for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a great discussion.
You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoy the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you.